Hello everyone, Professor Kuzluk here. So I just wanted to make an introductory video of thinking about international relations, some of the hallmarks of international relations, some of the key concepts that we think about and look at as scholars, as political scientists. IR, as a school of thought, is one of the major schools of thought within political science, one of the major schools of study. So as we've talked about in previous videos, there's American politics and comparative politics, political philosophy, and IR. So when we think about IR, we probably think about international relations quite a bit. The conflict in Russia, in Ukraine, conducted by Russia right now, the conflict in Iran and Israel, between Iran and Israel. So we think about how states interact with each other. So we think about IR a lot, but maybe we don't think about the theories of international relations. We might not think of the nuts and bolts in the same way that academics do. So I just wanted to upload a video, to create a video, to get us really thinking about these foundations of international relations. So one hallmark of IR is this idea of anarchy. This idea that there is no global authority. So as an example that I oftentimes use in the classroom and I've brought up in videos before is this idea that if you're in your dorm and if you're on campus and someone breaks into your dorm, you call the police, you call the authorities, and they come and they will figure out who broke into your dorm, or they are there to help you. In IR, who do you call if a state, a nation state, does something against another nation state? There isn't anyone to call. So this idea of anarchy is a main theme when we think about international relations. This idea that there is no global authority. So we think about and we try to figure out, okay, how do we have order and peace in a world of anarchy? And we'll see either in this video or a follow-up video that we have found ways to try to mitigate anarchy through international organizations. Other scholars point to like the hegemonic peace theory. So different scholars look at different ideas of, okay, how do we bring some peace to the world while we have this idea of anarchy? So let's just step back for a minute. And when we think about international relations, even when we think a lot about political science, we think about power. Who holds the power? Who in a situation, in a relationship, in the global environment holds the power? At IR, power is really the currency of international politics. And understanding its various forms is essential to understanding global interactions. So when we think of power, the first thing that we oftentimes think about is military power. Based on coercive capabilities, this can be arms, soldiers, deterrence, military power. When we think of the United States in the global arena, we think of the US's mighty military power, an unprecedented strength that the American military has. So military power can be used as a force, can invade another country, can engage in conflict. So when we think of the US war in Iraq, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, these are military uses of power. So they can be active, but they can also be passive. Deterrence is the main example that textbooks point to. Nuclear policy, security alliances like NATO. So you have a military that is a deterrence to another state committing an action. When we think about and we debate why nuclear powers don't go to war with each other, or why we haven't seen a nuclear war since the Second World War. Deterrence oftentimes comes to the forefront of those discussions, this passive use of military power. So when we think of IR, maybe the military is what we think about. We think of the force of the US, or we think of Russian soldiers. Economic power, though, is important as well. And we can capture how strong a country's economy is through gross domestic product, GDP, but also control of trade routes. Something that we hear a lot in the news about today. If the Straits of Hormuz or other shipping lanes get impacted by terrorist organizations or by nation states, closed down by nation states, how would that impact the global economy? So economic power can be just how big a country's economy is, how strong a country's economy is, but it can also be these things like being able to control trade routes, access to capital, access to labor. So maybe we don't think about economic power beyond how strong an economy is, GDP. But we do see in IR the use of sanctions. Well, the use of sanctions work better when you have a well-connected economy. And then the international community, as we saw after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, can come together and put pressure on Russia in this case to change their behavior. So we see that economic power can be wielded in this way. It can also be wielded through leverage through international trade. A good example of this is China's role in the Belt and Road Initiative, where they are gaining a lot of power and a lot of sway on the international community because of the Belt and Road Initiative, investing in the developing countries that then give China more economic power. So, okay, there's also this idea of political power, ability to influence other countries' political systems and outcomes. So this includes regime changes, electoral interference, diplomatic isolation, or recognition of states. So the U.S. has a ton of political power. Countries want relationships with the U.S. because then they get better economic relations. They're in the club with the U.S. So something else that we see in international relations, and maybe it's not talked about as much. Certainly 5-10 years ago it wasn't talked about as much as it is today. It is this idea of soft power. So soft power is kind of in the news quite a bit now because of the Trump administration's cuts to the programs like USAID, where the US is seemingly willing to pull back some of its soft power. So then what is soft power? It is this idea of influence through culture, values, diplomacy. Some examples of this are US influence via Hollywood, McDonald's, Harvard University, which is in the news, is an example of soft power. So as a country, you can sway other countries through cultural values, through diplomacy. Other countries want to be like country X because they see in movies how great that country is. So soft power absolutely plays a role. So we see economic power, political power, military power, soft power. We see these tools of the state, and we see how states have different levels of power through those prisms. So let's think for a few minutes about actors in the international system. So states are the big actor. So not state like Delaware, but state like the United States, China, Russia, Ukraine. These are political entities with sovereignty, with defined borders. When we think of the US, we think of defined borders. We can pull out a map and see where Canada is. So states have sovereignty, they have these defined borders, they have a population, and importantly, they have international recognition. So the Islamic State, which again isn't in the news as much today as it was a decade ago, but there's a discussion. Was the Islamic State a state? And most political scientists agreed no, the Islamic State wasn't a state. It didn't have international recognition. Its defined borders were very fluid. So no, Canada is a state, of course, but the Islamic State was not. So US, China, Brazil. Okay, so if we think of states as the big players in international relations, of course we see non-state actors, which comes to the forefront when we think of terrorism. We know that much of the violence committed on the international stage is not actually done by state actors. It's not necessarily done by Iran or Russia. Instead, it's done by non-state actors. It's done by terrorist groups. So in international relations, these terrorist groups absolutely, of course, are investigated, looked at, and thought about. Okay, so we also see international so non-governmental organizations or intergovernmental organizations, which absolutely play a role in international relations. So the UN, IMF, World Bank, WTO, absolutely play a role in international relations. They're not state actors, but states come together in agreements to try to work together to solve problems. Non-governmental organizations, of course, play a role. Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. These are independent actors that provide services, advocate for rights, offer aid. These organizations often fill in where states are weak or absent but lack coercive authority. These organizations do. So, okay, so we're starting to get a 30,000 foot level of international relations. States, the central unit, the central authority in IR, especially amongst realist scholars. Some liberal institutionalists will spend more time looking at these non-governmental organizations or organizations that states join to try to overcome that problem of anarchy. Remember, we have an anarchic world, so we're trying to figure out how we work together to solve problems. States, we know, of course, some states are more powerful than others, and so that plays a role in IR as well. Okay, I just wanted to give this 30,000 foot level understanding of some of the things that we'll dig deeper into when we think about IR. We'll dig deeper into military power and economic power, and we'll dig deeper into how states use soft power, and like I mentioned earlier, how states lose soft power. Something that's absolutely in the news a lot today is the US losing some of its soft power, and there's a debate, does it matter? So we live in an anarchic world, in an anarchic international environment. There is no overriding police force that's going to come. When we think about, okay, what's the main piece of IR? Like in much of political science, it's about power. Power, again, is the currency of international politics. And understanding its various forms is essential for understanding global interactions. So, again, military power, economic power, political power, and soft power all play a role. And then when we think about the actors in the international system, states, definitely the main actor, but so do non-state actors, stateless nations, intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations all play a role. Okay, so there'll be a series of videos about IR, and this was the first. Thank you for watching.